things, contribute to a person, to a person's frustration and anger, and at some point in life, he explodes.
In the summer of 1985, California trembled in fear. As temperatures soared, residents began boarding up their windows, triple-checking their locks, and sleeping with weapons nearby. The reason? A shadow that moved through the night, selecting victims at random, leaving behind scenes of unimaginable horror. Richard Ramirez, known as the Night Stalker, wasn't just another serial killer. He was a nightmare come to life, a predator who turned the safety of people's homes into torture chambers. His victims ranged from 6-year-old children to elderly couples in their 80s. No one was safe. No pattern existed. No way to predict where he would strike next. What made the Night Stalker's reign of terror uniquely horrifying wasn't just the brutality of his crimes. It was the way he merged violence with satanic imagery, leaving behind symbols that fueled fear and speculation. For 5 terrifying months, he transformed the California dream into a waking nightmare, leaving a legacy of fear that would haunt the state for decades to come. Born into the harsh reality of El Paso, Texas, on February 29, 1960, Richard Ramirez entered a world where violence wasn't just present, it was a daily companion. As the youngest of 5 children, Richard's early years were marked by brutal beatings from his father, Julian Ramirez, a laborer on the Santa Fe Railroad whose strict discipline often crossed the line into abuse. But it wasn't his father's violence that would plant the seeds of darkness in young Richard's mind. At 12 years old, he began spending time with his older cousin Miguel, a Vietnam War veteran whose experiences had left him deeply troubled. Miguel didn't just tell Richard war stories, he exposed him to graphic details of violence and death. These experiences became Richard's twisted education, warping his understanding of power, violence, and human worth. Then came the moment that would forever alter the course of Richard's life. In 1973, 13-year-old Richard stood frozen, watching as his cousin Miguel turned a gun on his wife Jessie. The crack of the gunshot, the spray of blood, the look in Jessie's eyes as she collapsed, these images burned themselves into Richard's young mind. He didn't just witness a murder, he witnessed the ultimate expression of power over another human being. The years that followed saw Richard spiral deeper into darkness. He dropped out of school, developed a crushing cocaine addiction, and found solace in Satanism. The frightened boy who had witnessed his cousin's crime was transforming into something else entirely, something that would soon stalk the nights of California, leaving a trail of horror in his wake. On April 10, 1984, in a dimly lit basement of a seedy San Francisco hotel, evil found its first victim. 9-year-old May Leung was making her way home from school when she encountered Richard Ramirez. What happened in that basement would remain a secret for years, hidden beneath layers of even more horrific crimes that were yet to come. May's body was discovered hours later, brutally beaten and sexually assaulted. The killer had left her hanging from a pipe, a sight so grotesque that even veteran officers struggled to maintain their composure. But in 1984, no one connected this savage crime to the name Richard Ramirez. The murder of this innocent child would go unsolved for decades, a cold case gathering dust, while its perpetrator continued his descent into darkness. The basement murder marked a turning point. Having crossed the threshold into killing, Ramirez began to change. His burglaries became more frequent, more violent. He started staying in cheap motels across California, moving like a shadow from city to city. The cocaine that had once been a habit now fueled sleepless nights of prowling, searching for opportunities, testing locked windows and doors. It wasn't until after his death, through advances in DNA technology, that investigators finally connected May Leung's murder to Ramirez. By then, he had long since earned his infamous title of the Night Stalker. And the basement killing was revealed as the first chapter in what would become one of California's most terrifying crime sprees. That dark basement in San Francisco wasn't just a crime scene, it was the birthplace of a monster. The spring of 1985 marked the beginning of a nightmare that would grip California in paralyzing fear. On March 17th in suburban Los Angeles, 22-year-old Maria Hernandez pulled into her driveway, unaware that death itself was waiting in the shadows. As she reached her front door, a tall, dark figure emerged from the darkness. The gunshot shattered the quiet night. Through a combination of luck and quick thinking, Maria survived the attack, playing dead as the killer stepped over her body and entered her home. Inside, 34-year-old Dale Okazaki was hiding behind a counter, desperate to escape the intruder. But as she peeked around the corner to check if the coast was clear, she came face to face with her killer. The last thing she saw was his twisted smile before the bullet tore through her skull. Maria, still outside, heard the gunshot and her friend's final breath. She would later become the first person to survive and describe the face of evil. The attack sent shockwaves through Los Angeles, but this was just the beginning. Less than an hour after Dale's murder, the killer struck again in Monterey Park. This time, he dragged 30-year-old Tsai Lian Yu from her car and executed her on the street. 2 murders in one night. No pattern, no warning, no mercy. Panic spread through California's communities like wildfire. People began double-checking their locks, installing security systems, and sleeping with weapons nearby. But these precautions wouldn't be enough. The killer was watching, learning, adapting. He moved through neighborhoods like a ghost, selecting his victims at random, leaving only fear and death in his wake. Local media outlets began reporting on the similarities between the attacks. The late-night hours, the seemingly random victim selection, the brutal efficiency of the kills. But they couldn't yet know that these were just the opening acts in what would become a months-long reign of terror. California was about to experience a summer unlike any other, where the simple act of going to sleep would become an exercise in terror. But what truly set these attacks apart, what made them uniquely terrifying, were the satanic symbols and imagery that Ramirez sometimes left behind. Like a demon stepping straight from hell itself, Ramirez didn't just murder. He left behind a trail of fear and speculation that would haunt survivors for the rest of their lives. On May 29, 1985, 83-year-old Mabel Bell and her disabled sister Florence Lang became victims of this theatrical evil. After brutalizing them in their home, Ramirez took his time drawing pentagrams on their bodies with lipstick. He left behind satanic symbols, adding to the terror of his crimes. The psychological warfare escalated with each attack. Victims who survived reported how he would ransack their homes, looking for crosses or religious icons, sometimes desecrating them in front of his terrified victims. Some reported him shouting, "Hail Satan!" In the darkness, his voice filled with menace. The pentagrams became his calling card, appearing on walls and on victims. He wanted everyone to know that these weren't just random acts of violence. They were performances for an audience that existed somewhere between this world and hell. As summer approached, the ritualistic elements of his attacks grew more pronounced. He would leave satanic symbols scattered throughout crime scenes, and his obsession with Satanism became a defining feature of his crimes. This wasn't just about killing anymore. It was about spreading terror through blasphemy, about making his victims feel like they were being attacked by something beyond human. The summer of 1985 descended upon California like a suffocating blanket of fear. As temperatures rose, so did the frequency of attacks, each more brutal than the last. The Night Stalker was no longer just a shadowy threat. He had become a constant, terrifying presence in every dark corner of Los Angeles County. On July 5th, the unthinkable happened when 16-year-old Whitney Bennett was attacked in her Sierra Madre home. As she lay sleeping, Ramirez struck her repeatedly with a tire iron, but something extraordinary occurred. Whitney survived the attack, though she was left forever changed. Just 2 days later, Joyce Nelson's lifeless body was discovered in her Monterey Park residence. The killer's signature Avia shoe print marked the scene like a mocking signature, but the Night Stalker wasn't finished. He was just warming up. July 20th brought double horror when Maxon and Layla Knighting were found shot to death in their bed. The community's fear turned to panic. People stopped sleeping with their windows open despite the scorching heat. Gun sales skyrocketed. Everyone became a suspect. every shadow a potential threat. The attacks continued relentlessly. August 6th, Chris and Virginia Peterson shot in their heads, but miraculously survived. August 8th, Sakina Abawath raped while her husband lay dead beside her. August 18th, Peter and Barbara Pan attacked in their Lake Merced home, with Jack the Knife scrawled on their bedroom wall in lipstick. Police were overwhelmed, following countless leads that led nowhere. The killer seemed to strike at random, leaving no pattern to predict his next move. Detective Gil Carrillo and Frank Salerno worked tirelessly, connecting dots that seemed impossible to link. They knew they were dealing with someone different, someone who didn't just kill, but seemed to feed off the terror he created. Every morning, residents would scan the news, dreading to learn where the Night Stalker had struck next. Parents stopped letting their children play outside. Neighbors formed watch groups, patrolling streets with baseball bats and flashlights. But still, the killing continued. The summer of 1985 had become a season of perpetual nightmare, and nobody knew when or where it would end. By late August, investigators had their first real break in the case. A single Avia sneaker print found at multiple crime scenes. This wasn't just any shoe, it was a rare model, and only one pair in that size had been sold in the Los Angeles area. Finally, they had something concrete to work with, but the Night Stalker made a crucial mistake on August 24th. He attacked Bill Carnes and Inez Erickson, but this time, both victims survived. Inez provided police with a detailed description of her attacker's distinctive appearance and rotting teeth. The puzzle pieces were finally coming together. The very next day, Ramirez stole a Toyota, unaware that this simple act would be his undoing. Police found his fingerprint on the rearview mirror, and suddenly they had a name to match their evidence. Richard Ramirez. The authorities wasted no time releasing his mugshot to the media, plastering his face across every newspaper and television screen in California. What happened next was nothing short of extraordinary. On August 30th, Ramirez, completely oblivious to his public exposure, walked into a convenience store in East Los Angeles. A group of citizens recognized him instantly, and the chase began. Ramirez fled, attempting to carjack a woman, but her husband intervened. As word spread through the neighborhood, residents emerged from their homes armed with whatever weapons they could find. The Night Stalker, who had terrorized California for so long, now found himself being hunted. He ran through streets and jumped fences, but the angry mob grew larger. They caught up with him in a narrow alley, beating him with pipes and fists until he was subdued. When police finally arrived, they had to protect Ramirez from the very people he had terrorized for so long. The hunter had become the hunted, and justice was served not by the authorities, but by ordinary citizens who refused to let evil walk their streets any longer. The trial of Richard Ramirez would become one of the most expensive in California history, lasting over 4 years and costing taxpayers more than $1.8 million. In the courtroom, Ramirez reveled in his newfound infamy, flashing satanic symbols and shouting, "Hail Satan!" at crucial moments. His dark eyes and unsettling smile seemed to mock the justice system itself. But the evidence against him was overwhelming. Survivor testimonies, DNA evidence, and the infamous Avia shoe print painted a picture of unbridled evil that no theatrical display could dismiss. On September 20th, 1989, the jury delivered their verdict, guilty on 13 counts of murder, 5 counts of attempted murder, 11 sexual assaults, and 14 burglaries. The judge sentenced him to death by gas chamber. Perhaps the strangest chapter of the Night Stalker saga came after his conviction. While on death row, Ramirez received hundreds of love letters from admirers fascinated by his dark charisma. In 1996, he married Doreen Leoy, a magazine editor who had written him numerous letters during his incarceration. She vowed to commit suicide when he was executed, but fate had different plans. The man who had brutally taken so many lives would never face his own execution. On June 7th, 2013, Richard Ramirez died quietly in his prison cell from B-cell lymphoma, a form of blood cancer. He was 53 years old. After all the terror, all the satanic imagery, all the court drama, the Night Stalker's story ended not with the bang of justice, but with the whisper of natural causes. His death left many questions unanswered, and some investigators believe we may never know the true extent of his crimes. The 9-year-old case of Mei Leung wasn't connected to him until after his death. How many other victims might there be? How many families still wait for answers that will never come? The Night Stalker case fundamentally changed California. Families who'd never thought twice about leaving their windows open on a warm summer night now triple-checked their locks. Security system sales skyrocketed. People stopped trusting the darkness. But even today, decades after Ramirez took his last breath on death row, disturbing questions linger. We know he traveled extensively throughout California during his crime spree. Police files from that era show unsolved murders with similar signatures, brutal home invasions, satanic symbols, survivors describing a tall, dark-haired man with rotting teeth. Consider this: Ramirez was caught by chance, thanks to alert citizens and a single fingerprint. How many crimes did he commit that were never tied to him? How many evidence boxes sit in police storage, holding secrets we've yet to uncover? And perhaps most chilling of all, during his trial, Ramirez hinted
in a rare
at
interview, Ramirez refused to discuss
these things.
To confirm this. Were there others who escaped
to a
justice?
person.
The Night Stalker may be gone, but his shadow still looms over
To a
California.
person's frustration.
Every unlocked window, every dark corner, every unexplained sound in the night carries an echo of that terrible summer of 1985. Some wounds, it seems, never fully heal.